Welcome to our third day of retreat. I hope and pray these days are drenched in God's peace and love. We begin with prayer using Psalm 62. In God alone is my soul at rest. My salvation comes from God. God alone is my rock, my salvation, my fortress. I shall not greatly falter. Be at rest, my soul, in God alone, from whom comes my hope. In God is my salvation and my glory, my rock of strength. In God is my refuge. Trust at all times, O people. Pour out your hearts to God, our refuge. Yesterday, we explored the many losses we have faced in life and the need to surrender to our God, who loves us and wants to make a home in us. Every day, every moment, and every situation is an opportunity to surrender to our loving God. Today, I'd like to offer some reflections on what will get us through these difficult and stressful times. Living in the fray of life takes a toll on our body, mind, and spirit. Just listening to the news each day can arouse fear and panic. It can exhaust us and strip us of our power and peace of mind. If ever we needed to be grounded, now is the time. In Luke's Gospel, chapter 6, Jesus tells us what we must do. He describes how to build our house, to dig deeply and lay the foundation on rock. So when the floods come, even the river bursting from its banks, the house will not shake because it has been built well. Building our relationship with our rock, the source of our being, is the way to stay firmly grounded in God. Living with more awareness of God's presence and love is key to staying vibrant, to staying in the fray of life. Perhaps now more than ever, prayer is essential in our lives. You remember the definition of prayer, lifting mind and heart to God. It sounds so simple, but it is not at all easy to do. Actually, it is rare that we open our minds and heart to God in order to show God what is actually going on in our minds and hearts. We may assume that our thoughts and feelings are inappropriate and that we are praying only when we have good thoughts and warm, fuzzy feelings. But we can't turn those on or off like a water faucet. Our thoughts are not always holy, and our hearts not always warm and pure. Yet it is at time like this that we most need prayer. And what we need to take to prayer are precisely those bitter thoughts and unholy feelings. Just read some of the Psalms. Those writers did not hold back, and neither should we. Their raw emotions and our raw emotions can teach us something about how we ought to pray. I'm sure over the years you have learned and even practiced different types of prayer. Well, there are many volumes written on this. I'd like to give you a quick description of prayer, beginning with vocal prayer and moving to contemplative prayer. This is my version of Prayer 101, abbreviated and simplified. So if you want to know more, please read so many of those books that describe prayer more adequately and in greater detail. Our earliest form of prayer we learned as children was likely the Our Father, the Hail Mary, the acts of faith, hope, and love. That is vocal prayer. The words are set for us, and we memorized them. Essential to this vocal prayer was to mean what we say. Our focus was on the words. But as we grew in our relationship with God, we likely were challenged to move to a deeper level, to reflect the transition in our relationship with God. It's very likely then that we learn to meditate, to reflect on Scripture, and to converse with God in our own words, not someone else's. In this type of prayer, it's essential to say what we mean. And as we keep growing, listening, developing greater trust, growing in love, we do this as we would in any other relationship. The words of John of the Cross describe yet a deeper level of prayer. He wrote, and I quote, "The Father spoke one word from all eternity, and he spoke it in silence, and it is in silence that we hear it." End quote. Let me explain this internal movement by using the Rosary as an example. In saying the Rosary, you may focus your attention on the words of the Hail Mary and the Lord's Prayer. That's vocal prayer, even if you pray it silently. Or we can reflect on the mysteries of the Rosary, bringing to your attention the events and the life of Jesus and Mary. That's meditation. But in your praying the Rosary, you may find yourself caught up in the love of God and silently become aware of God's presence. And you may stop saying the words or thinking about the events in the life of Mary. You may simply sit in silence, awe, quiet, peaceful, absorbed in that moment. And that is contemplation. Many times I have heard people being very unsure about this movement, and they even resist the silence, trying to fill it in with words. No, just be still. Listen to the God who loves you as you are and delights in your presence. Paul tells us in his letter to the Thessalonians, pray always, encouraging us to live with the awareness that keeps us anchored in our relationship with God. Obviously, we can't pray 24/7, but we can learn to live with the awareness of God as the source of our lives. And we can be mindful that every breath we take is an affirmation of the gift of life, and that breath can become prayer. In fact, it is prayer. If you recognize your breathing as prayer, you are praying 24/7. Living with that awareness is also the pathway to an increased sensitivity to God's presence. As our ability to pay attention to our ongoing experiences increases, so will our capacity to encounter the divine in the midst of our ordinary lives. That is what it means to live contemplatively. And living that way invites us to perceive God's presence in all our experiences. In chapter 3 of the book of Exodus, we hear the story of Moses tending his flock, coming to Mount Horeb, and seeing fire coming out of a bush. While the bush was blazing, it was not burning up. You're familiar with the event. Moses approaches the bush, curious that it isn't being consumed by the flames, and hears God call out, "Moses, come no nearer, take off your shoes, for the place on which you stand is holy ground." Rabbi Lawrence Kushner, noted author of many volumes on Jewish spirituality, claims that Moses had to be watching that bush burn for 7 to 10 minutes in order to realize what was happening. That's the time it takes for a bush to turn to ashes. This story reminds us that common experiences can reveal God's presence If we look at our God-soaked world with mindfulness, with a long look at the world. From this story, we see that unless we pay attention to our experiences for more than a moment, we're likely to miss the ordinary miracles that take place in our lives. Our present experience is the place where we stand. As with Moses, our personal experience is also holy ground, because God is there. It is where we too are to encounter the Holy One and to hear the Creator of the universe lovingly call our name. And like Moses, we must take off our shoes and reverently tend the fertile soil that is our lives. Living in a world drenched in divinity challenges us to look closely at all things. Being contemplative entails an attitude or a perspective of viewing our reality. With all we are experiencing these days, and I don't have to remind you, we need to embrace this attitude for our own good as well as for the good of the world. We probably strain to recognize the divinity in some situations. I know I do, but now more than ever, we need that contemplative stance, and the world needs that contemplative stance. Being contemplative is standing in wonder and awe at the routine miracles that keep our universe and our bodies functioning harmoniously. It is not taking life for granted. Being contemplative involves a constant willingness to be taken by surprise. It is not being jaded and cynical. Being contemplative requires being wide awake and fresh in our perception of people and situations. It is not being distracted and filled with preoccupations and prejudices. Being contemplative is being vulnerable, letting events and people impact us fully. It is not being controlling and manipulative. So how do we deepen our attention? We need not search far and wide, as this story of Anthony DeMello teaches us. "Excuse me," said the ocean fish. "You are older than I, so can you tell me where to find this thing they call the ocean?" "The ocean," said the older fish, "is the thing you are in now." "Oh, this? But this is water. What I'm seeking is the ocean," said the disappointed fish as he swam away to search elsewhere. There isn't anything to look for. All we need to do is look. Jesuit theologian Walter Burkhardt describes contemplation as a long, loving look at the real. By this, he means the real is what we see in daily life. The geese flying overhead in formation, the moon rising in the east, the wind blowing leaves across the road, the sun setting with the sky ablaze with color. Looking at that reality without analyzing it, defining it, or describing it, simply looking and being at one with it. Enter it. Just as Moses looked at the burning bush and continued looking at the reality that it wasn't consumed, so we do the same. Just look. Contemplation is pausing long enough to notice and appreciate what we see. It may last 40 seconds or 40 minutes, whatever time it takes to absorb the mystery. The pausing and noticing is what matters. I'm reminded of the words of the character Shug in The Color Purple. It pisses God off when we walk by the color purple in a field somewhere and don't notice it. Being contemplative means we notice it. Yet what we notice isn't always causing us delight. The real includes systemic racism, the deaths of almost 200,000 people lost to this virus in our country alone, children separated from their parents and put in cages, poverty, homelessness, hunger. Burkhardt recognizes that contemplation must end in compassion, compassion which is synonymous with love. Father Michael Judge, the Franciscan who ministered to firemen in New York City and one of the first casualties of the 9/11 terrorist attack, left us with this advice. When I don't know what's next, I get down on my knees and pray, Lord, take me, mold me, fashion me, show me what you want. Then I watch and listen, and it will come. Michael had acquired a wide reputation for his ministry among the poor and homeless, alcoholics, victims of AIDS, and his outreach to the gay community and others alienated or marginalized in the church. His prayer led him to compassionate ministry to all those people. If we follow his advice, pray, watch, and listen, God will direct us to the work we are called to do at this time. The gospel tells numerous stories of Jesus' compassion, feeding the thousands, healing the lepers, raising the son of the widow. The plight of others always stirred Jesus' heart and moved him to reach out in healing and forgiving ways. The contemplative attitude of Jesus moved him to understand situations and events from the point of view of those involved, as in his interaction with the woman who suffered from a hemorrhage, told in Mark's Gospel. Jesus noticed someone had touched his cloak, turned around in the crowd and asked who touched him. No doubt the disciples wondered why Jesus was so intent on finding out who touched him. Then the woman fell at his feet and told him the whole truth. Only after understanding the meaning of this woman's long and futile search for healing did Jesus send her off, healed, peaceful, grateful. Contemplation will lead us to action, action that can bring love, healing, and forgiveness. The needs around us are tremendous. So I encourage you to pray about one or two very specific needs of the community around you or in our country. Focus on that for your action. None of us can handle the multiple needs or issues, so channel your energies on those particular areas, trusting that God's energy will flow through you to those in need of help. Remember Michael Judge's advice, show me what you want. Pray, notice, and listen. You'll know what to do. Living with an attitude of God's presence will get us through these trying times. It's in that attitude that we will continue to be grounded in God's love and peace. My prayer for you these days is that you will feel comfortable inviting God into another room in your home. God bless you.